So as I said, I'm Jenya Cassidy, and I'm the director of the California Work and Family Coalition. And I'm going to have staff that are on this training introduce themselves. I'm going to pass it to Katie Duberg.
Thanks so much. Katie Duberg with the California Work and Family Coalition, Political Organizing Director, and I will pass to my colleague, Angelica.
Hi, everyone. Angelica Andrade, pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm the Administrative Assistant and Spanish Training Coordinator. And Jared is our Communication Manager, but he's not here today. So I'll pass it to Natasha.
Hi, everyone. Natasha Castro, pronouns she, her. I'm the Education and Outreach Organizer with the coalition, and I'm going to pass it on to our interns to introduce themselves. Yeah, so our two interns are Brianna Maldonado and Luis Garcia Chavez.
Yes, and this is a list. We actually have a couple of new members that we'll be adding soon to the California Work and Family Coalition. And if you're not a member and interested in joining, you can contact me or contact Natasha, whose email you saw a minute ago. Go to the next slide. The California Work and Family Coalition, for people who are new, we are a statewide alliance of organizations, and a big part of what we do is some of what we're talking about here today. We work on family-friendly policies, especially paid leave and paid sick days, those types of policies that allow people to take time to care for themselves and care for their families. So this is something that we'll be talking about, in depth today. So just to go over this briefly, in 2022, we had some really huge changes that are going to impact a lot of Californians, and a lot of what we do is organizing a lot of organizations and people together to build people power in order to pass legislation that we really need. Next slide. So just to go over some of the big things that happened last year, as of January 1st, 2023, a bill that just passed last year, AB 1041, which was a Buffy Wicks bill, it allows California caregivers to care for a chosen family member, or what we're calling it's a designated person. So in the past, you had a certain list of family members that you could take time off to care for if they had a serious health condition. And now this recognizes a lot more diverse families by allowing people to care for a designated person, whether they're related by blood, or it could be somebody like an uncle or aunt who wasn't in the list prior. So this is a really important bill that really helps us be able to make paid leave work for more families. Also, starting January 1st this year, for the first time, California has bereavement leave. It's just job protected and unpaid leave, but really important in that you could take bereavement leave for up to 5 days and not lose your employment. So this is a very, very important bill. Next slide. So the other laws that we passed in 2002, sometimes laws come into play much later than the day they were passed because there's kind of a lead up to them. One of the really big ones was SB 951 Durazzo. This is affordable paid leave for all, something that's been on the coalition list for a long time because too many people could not afford to take paid leave when they had a reason to take it, because the wage replacement of 55 or 60, later 60% was too low for a lot of workers. So this would raise the wage replacement for a lot of workers up to 90% if they go on disability for their own condition or care for a family member or bond with a new child. So for lower wage workers, it's 90%, and for everybody else, it'll go up to 70%, making it really a lot more affordable to a lot of Californians. The other bill that also will come into effect later, July 1st, 2026, is something that SB 1058 Durazzo. This will allow us to collect race and ethnicity data when people take paid leave. This is really important because in the past, we just didn't have enough data to really show who's benefiting from paid leave and who isn't. This will definitely help our future, it'll definitely help our future policy work. So next slide. So right now I'm gonna pass it over to Katie to talk about, to talk about advocacy. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenya. So we'll just start with a quick introduction to advocacy. Next slide, please. So why are we meeting with state assembly members and state senators on May 4th? The reason why we're having this virtual advocacy day and why it's important to meet with state assembly members and state senators is because our state government is deciding right now whether or not to support several important bills and make them into laws. Next slide. So what a bill is, as I think many folks may know already, is it's essentially a proposal for a new law. And so in order for a bill to pass and become law, these are all of the steps that need to happen. More than 50% of state assembly members must vote yes. More than 50% of state senators must vote yes. And then after all of that, the governor can either sign the bill and it will become law, or he can veto the bill or not sign it and it will not become law. Next slide, please. So in the California state government, we have 80 state assembly members, we have 40 state senators, and we have 1 governor. Next slide. And who does each assembly member and state senator represent? They represent you. So we all have an opportunity to vote for assembly members and senators and the governor during elections. So each of us are represented by both a state assembly member and a state senator, and then everyone who lives in California is represented by the governor. And I think for all of you, we already have this information because you shared it with us when you registered for Advocacy Day, but there's a link in this slide to find out who your representatives are. And I would actually just note that because a lot of districts have changed due to redistricting this year, even if you already knew who your assembly member or state senator was previously, it's a good time to double check because some people's districts and representatives have changed. Next slide. So the reason why it's important for you to meet with your legislator is because when you live or work in an assembly or Senate district, you are a constituent of that district. Meaning that that assembly member or state senator's job is to represent you. And so when you meet with state assembly members and state senators, it's important to make sure that they hear from you, their constituents, before they make decisions about whether or not to support important bills. Next slide. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Angelica, who's going to talk a little bit about what to expect when meeting with legislators.
Thank you, Katie. So now moving on to meeting with legislators plus what to expect in a meeting. Next slide, please. So typically meetings with legislators or their staff last about 15 to 30 minutes. Meeting with staff can be just as important as meeting with the legislator. So oftentimes you won't be meeting with the legislator, but you will be meeting with staff. It's the staff person's job to brief the legislator on what community members and different organizations are saying. So what you tell them will inform what they tell the assembly member or senator. Next slide, please. So in these legislative meetings, there are advocate meeting roles. So we usually have a group leader who will be facilitating the meeting. The speakers are the advocates. So usually within your group, you will identify someone who can briefly explain what the bill does and why it is important to them and or their community. You will also have someone who can answer tough questions and someone who asks the question. So will the legislator support the bill? There will also be a note taker in these meetings, helping to take notes on key points, questions, and any follow-up that may be needed for the office. And if you're not sure what speaking role you'd like to have, make sure to at least introduce yourself in the meeting. Next slide, please. So what to share when meeting with a legislator or their staff. Next slide. So to start off, why should a legislator even hear from you? So you are the expert on your own experience, and while this bill or issue matters to you. So when you share your personal experience, it reminds the legislator or their staff that this bill is important and has real impacts for people living in California. Legislators must balance many different interests and perspectives as they make decisions about what legislation to support, and they may not have heard or thought about your unique perspective. Now, to deciding what you'll actually share with them, we encourage you to share what you are comfortable with and what feels empowering to you to share. So it is okay to get emotional when you share your story. Our emotions are exactly why we are advocating for these bills. You can decide to leave certain details out when you share your story, and we will be meeting with these legislators in groups, and the other people in your group are there to support you as you share your story. And if you decide that you don't want to share something personal, that is completely okay. You can have a different speaking role in the visit, like speaking about the need for this policy that you see in your community, or speaking about the health impacts of the policy, or even asking if the legislator will support the policy. And now to how to share your personal story or perspective. So you can describe why you care about the problem that the bill would solve. So for example, I personally experienced this problem, or I see this problem often in the community I live in or work in, or I see this problem as important to solve because of my values and or beliefs. And you can also talk about it as like, this bill would address the problem I referenced because I personally would have a different experience, or people in the community I live in or work in would benefit, or I would see my values and or beliefs reflected in our laws. And now we are gonna be moving on to talking about the bills we'll be advocating for on May 4th. But it is very important to note that you do not need to become a policy expert on all of these bills to be an effective advocate for change. Next slide, please. So our goal for today is for you to identify at least one bill that you care about and practice sharing why that bill is important to you, so that you can feel confident when you meet with legislators and their staff on May 4th. Next slide, please. And now I'll pass it to Jenia to go over our first bill.
Thanks, Angelica. So yeah, California paid sick and safe days. This is a really important issue for Californians. And right now, California is one of the states that does have paid sick and safe days. And we'll talk about that and also talk about what we're fighting for now. So paid sick and safe days, as many of you may know, you can use it for your own illness or to care for a family member. And by care, this could mean anything, including like taking somebody to the doctor for care, diagnosis. It could be the treatment of an existing condition, an ongoing condition. It could even be preventative care, taking them to a annual checkup, things like that. And it also why we call it paid sick and safe days is that they can also be used to seek care or services related to domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, which is also really important. Next slide. So right now, California workers have up to a minimum of 3 days of paid sick leave per year. They can accrue that amount. This is the law for almost all workers in California can get this. Definitely not enough, but it has been the law since 2015. And, you know, it's really important that people know about the law that we have. Next slide. So right now, for our paid sick days, you need to be employed for at least 90 days and have worked in California for 30 days. You accrue the amount of leave, 1 hour of paid leave for every 30 hours of work. So you're accruing it up to a minimum of 3 hours. So many employers do have more, but many don't have any. And since this law was passed now, they have to at least have this 3. You can decide how much you use at once. For example, you don't even need to take a full day. You could take a half day at work for a doctor's appointment if that's all you need. And you do have to take 2 hours at a time, which is our current requirement in paid sick days. So the employer must pay 100% of your regular rate of pay. It's a lot easier, for example, than anything you have to apply for, because what it should mean is just once you've accrued this time, you just don't have a break in what you're paid. Employers cannot deny requests for paid sick days. And they don't have to know, this is really important, your employer does not have to have the lowdown or all the information on exactly why you're using your paid sick days. They can't really require you to find a coworker to cover your absence as a condition of using leave. And we were talking about this earlier. For example, my daughter works in a restaurant, and often if something comes up, they'll have a coworker take their shift, and that's kind of done between the workers. That's fine, when it works out. But if somebody is sick suddenly, they do not have to legally have that responsibility to fill their shift with somebody else. They would have, if they've accrued it, they would have the right to a paid sick day. So as probably some of you live in some of these wonderful cities, there are California cities that have passed local laws that do require employers to provide more than the 3 days. Berkeley, Emeryville, LA, Oakland, San Diego, San Francisco, Santa Monica, and West Hollywood. There may be even more in the future, but what we really want to do and what we're talking about today is how do we make a much more robust law for the whole state. So the other thing to know is that they can cap the days as 3 per year. And, 3 days is just really not enough. One of the things we learned during COVID is that, something like this can happen at any time. And it was very important to have the supplemental paid sick leave that we had during COVID. This was literally a lifeline for a lot of retail workers and other workers who come face to face with people every day in their work. They really can't avoid it. They absolutely need that time to either quarantine or, to be off the floor when they are sick, to be able to stay home and heal. This leave is no longer in effect, but one of the things that we got really passionate about during the COVID times is that we just really need a much more robust paid sick leave, for the state of California. And right now, this year, we're very excited that there is a bill, SB 616. It's a Gonzalez Bear, California state paid sick and safe days. And this bill is pretty simple. It would require California employers to provide up to a minimum of 7 paid sick and safe days per year. So from 3 to 7. And people would be able to, just like now, be able to use it for preventative care for a family member, or also for reasons that are related to domestic violence or stalking. So it basically takes the law we have now from 3 up to 7 paid sick days. And this is a pretty simple law, but it is one we're very passionate about. And right now we're going to go into breakout groups to talk about why this is important to us and practice a little bit how we're going to be talking to our legislators. And I want to thank you, our breakout group facilitators, Sarah Diaz, Sonia Mendoza, Jenna Shankman, and Nina from ARP. Thank you so much for doing this. And we'll be moving into breakout groups right now.
Okay, so now we are moving on to our next bill that will be AB 518, so Pay Family Leave for Chosen Family. But before we get into that, we're going to have a short little recap on Pay Family Leave. So who you can receive Pay Family Leave benefits to care as of right now. Next slide, please. So paid family leave and disability insurance are like two halves of a whole. They are both wage replacement programs funded by the California State Disability Insurance Fund, which is funded through employee contributions. So in other words, your money. In California, we have pay for when you can't work if you are pregnant, disabled, caring for a family member, or bonding with a new child. And in this small graphic, you can see California State Disability Insurance is the whole. And within that, there are 2 programs, disability insurance and paid family leave. Next slide, please. So here at the top in yellow, you can see disability insurance and why you would take disability insurance. So for your own health condition and for a pregnancy related condition. At the bottom in red, we have paid family leave and the reasons why you would take paid family leave. So to bond with a new child, care for an ill family member, and prepare for a military exigency. Now, the eligibility requirements for paid family leave and state disability insurance. So for both programs, you must be paying into state disability insurance and have earned at least 300 from which STI deductions were withheld during the base period. And we have hyperlinked an EDD calculator where you can kind of get an estimate of what your weekly benefit amount would look like. And the slides will be shared with everyone, so you'll have access to anything that's hyperlinked in the presentation. So if you are taking paid family leave, you need a qualifying reason. So that would be because you have a new child or need to care for a seriously ill family member. And for state disability insurance, you must be unable to do regular or customary work due to your own serious illness or disability, which includes pregnancy. And you must be in the labor market and must have suffered wage loss. Next slide, please. So qualifying reasons for paid family leave. Again, paid family leave provides partial pay for the following reasons. So for caregivers, it is to care for a seriously ill family member. And the family member must be the caregiver's child, spouse, domestic partner, parent, grandparent, grandchild, parent-in-law, or sibling. And you can also take paid family leave to bond and care for a newborn, adopted, or fostered child. And that leave must be taken within the first year after birth or placement. Next slide. So it is important to note that paid family leave and state disability insurance are wage replacement programs only. So they do not require your employer to give you your job back when you return from leave. However, there are job protection laws, and in this training, we will be focusing on the California Family Rights Act, also known as CFRA. We will only be focusing on this one today just because we're focusing on caregiving leave. And CFRA applies to California only. And the eligibility requirements for CFRA are 1 year on the job, have worked 1,250 hours in the prior year, so about 25 hours a week, and work at an employer with 5 or more employees. So as of January 1st, 2023, California workers eligible for CFRA can take up to 12 weeks of job-protected, unpaid leave to care for a seriously ill designated person, in addition to the listed family members. This is a huge step forward towards recognizing how California families care for each other. However, to take leave, California workers need their jobs protected and to also receive paid family leave benefits. So as of right now, you cannot receive paid family leave benefits for a designated person. Next slide, please. So this is what caregiving leave for chosen family currently looks like. So as you can see, the 8 weeks of PFL for caregiving does not include a designated person, so you cannot receive paid family leave benefits from the EDD. But you could still take unpaid leave for 12 total weeks, and they would be job protected under the California Family Rights Act. You just would not get paid. Next slide. But with AB 518, paid family leave for chosen family. Next slide. So California's paid family leave program currently allows California workers to receive partial pay when caring for a seriously ill child, parent, parent-in-law, grandparent, grandchild, sibling, spouse, or registered domestic partner only. So again, it does not include the designated person. So California workers cannot currently receive paid family leave if they need to care for a member of their chosen or extended family who is not included in the current list of family members. Next slide. So AB 518, authored by Assemblymember Wicks, would allow Californians to use their paid family leave to care for listed family members and any other individual related by blood or whose association with the employee is the equivalent of a family relationship. So we do need to update the paid family leave definition of family to reflect how California families care for each other. So with AB 518, if it were to get implemented, caregiving leave for chosen family would look like this. So as you can see, there are 2 green check marks, meaning you would receive the 8 weeks of caregiving leave to care for a designated person. So you would receive paid family leave benefits from the EDD, and those 8 weeks would also be job protected under the California Family Rights Act if you meet all eligibility requirements. So this scenario is for someone who meets eligibility requirements for both the paid family leave program and the job protection from California Family Rights Act.
So we'll start with AB 524, which is the Family Caregiver Anti-Discrimination Act. So we wanted to give a little bit of background just about why anti-discrimination laws are important. And so what anti-discrimination laws do is they provide an important workplace protection against unfair treatment. And California workers are already legally protected from discrimination based on characteristics like race, gender identity, and marital status. And so what this means is under current law, an employer cannot refuse to hire or promote you because of your gender identity. Next slide, please. However, currently, California anti-discrimination law does not protect workers from being discriminated against because they are family caregivers. So under current law, California employees do not have legal protection if their employer treats them unfairly, for instance, by denying them an opportunity or a promotion due to assumptions or stereotypes about their ability to do their job because they are a parent or family caregiver. Next slide. So what AB 524, authored by Assemblymember Wicks, would do is it would simply ensure that California workers are protected from discrimination because of their status as a family caregiver. It simply requires that workplace policies do not discriminate against people because they are family caregivers. It does not require employers to make exceptions to policies for parents or family caregivers. So in other words, all this bill is saying is you can't treat someone worse because they're a family caregiver. Next slide. So we wanted to give some examples to kind of paint a picture of what this looks like. So an employer couldn't do any of the following based on assumptions that the employee is unable to do their job because they are a family caregiver: refuse to hire someone, refuse a promotion, refuse a raise, or fire their employee. So for instance, they couldn't say, oh, well, we don't want to give this person this promotion because we know that they're a parent, and so we don't think that they can handle the responsibilities of that job. Next slide. And so our final bill that we're going to talk about is AB 575, authored by Assemblymember Papan, which makes a couple of different improvements to the paid family leave program. Next slide. So this bill would do three things. The first thing it would do is remove the limit on family members taking paid family leave to care for the same person. So right now, if you apply for paid family leave for caregiving, you have to put on your application that no one else, no other family members are available to care for your same family member. And we know that a lot of times actually more than one person is really needed to care for that same family member. For instance, sometimes it takes more than one person even to lift the family member, or if someone is caring for a family member with Alzheimer's or dementia, they might require someone to really be keeping an eye on them, make sure they don't wander, and then someone else to be preparing meals, right? So this is just a barrier that's preventing people from caring for their family when they need to, and we want to remove it, and this bill would do that. Next slide. So the second thing that this bill would do is it would add in that people who are acting in loco parentis and make sure that those folks can also qualify for bonding leave. So as Angelica covered earlier in the training, parents who don't give birth, so partners, fathers, adoptive and foster parents can already qualify for paid family leave for bonding. And if someone is acting in loco parentis, that's a legal term that kind of describes someone who's acting in place of a parent, but who doesn't have a legal relationship with a child. So they haven't gone through the foster or adoptive process. And that can happen for different reasons. It just may not be the right choice for that family, or sometimes there are situations where the child's parent is seriously ill, and so is unable to care for the child, or is receiving substance abuse treatment, or other situations where someone is stepping in and it just doesn't make sense to go through the foster or adoptive process. And so we want to make sure that people can take bonding leave, that the child, when they're newly placed in that home, can get that support from the person who's acting as a parent to them. Next slide. And then the last thing this bill would do is remove the law that allows employers to require employees to use up to 2 weeks of accrued vacation before receiving paid family leave. And this is really important because we are all paying into this program with every paycheck. And so when we have a need to use paid family leave, we think people should be able to get those benefits right away. They shouldn't be forced to use up to 2 weeks of accrued vacation. Next slide. So that, in summary, that's AB 524, the Family Caregiver Discrimination Act, and AB 575, authored by Assemblymember Papan, paid family leave improvements. And I wanted to just give folks a chance to enter into the chat if you were impacted by any of the barriers addressed by one of these bills, something you might want to share with your legislators about the bills, or if you think that these bills address a need that you're seeing in the community. Just wanted to give people a chance to share that in the chat. And also, if anyone has any questions about either bill, we're happy to answer them. Thanks. Seeing a couple people post in the chat, so I'm just gonna kind of read out some highlights from that. So having to use all your vacation leave before taking PFL really sets new parents up for failure because they're out of sick days in that first year when kids get sick a lot. So you have to take unpaid leave, but only if your employer allows it. So yeah, really important barrier addressed by AB 575. And then someone sharing that AB 524 is the bill that has their biggest support right now because it impacted them personally and they think it's really important for their community. Yeah, and then someone else sharing that they shared caregiving, and there's no way that any of them could have done it alone. Yeah, that's right. I'm just hearing that it's good to hear about the importance of sharing caregiving with family members. So I'll give folks another minute or so to share anything you feel comfortable sharing in the chat before we move on. Yeah, and another person sharing, needing more than one person to care for their parent. Thank you all for sharing this. And I'm sure that folks were sharing things in the breakout groups too, but it's so important for us to remember and to remind our legislators of kind of the real human impacts of the policy changes that we're advocating for. Next slide. All right, so I'm now going to pass the presentation to Angelica, who's going to talk about some common challenges and recommendations for how to address them.
Yes, thank you, Katie. So next slide, please. So we have some common challenges like for questions. So if there's someone in your group who can answer tough questions, it is important to plan ahead so that everyone in your group knows who can answer tough questions. So the day of Advocacy Day, there will be time for everyone to meet in their groups to kind of like get an idea of who can answer the tough questions and who wants to share on what. So it's good to identify the person that is ready to answer those tough questions. And if you are asked a question and you don't know the answer, that's okay. Just let them know that you don't know the answer to that question, but we'll find out and get back to them. And this is where the note taker can be taking note of that question and jotting it down so that we can follow back up with the office. Next slide, please. And other challenges that can be seen in these meetings are the staff person or legislator may seem a bit distracted or have a hard time empathizing with what you are saying. If this does happen, just take a deep breath and don't be afraid to pause if you need a moment to collect your thoughts. Remember to continue to be polite and try to connect with the staff person as a human being. And if the legislator or their staff may say that they have concerns about the bill, again, just breathe and then respond saying something like, thank you for sharing that concern from my perspective, and then say something about why the bill is important to you or why it would be important to your community. Next slide. And remember, it is your decision to speak up about the issues that matter to you. That makes you an advocate, not saying the perfect thing every time or even how your message appears to be received by legislator or their staff. The staff and legislators who don't already support our issues need to hear from us the most. Next slide, please. And now I'll pass it to Katie.
All right. Thanks so much, Angelica. So we wanted to talk a little bit about logistics, which I know we addressed briefly earlier, just so everyone knows what to expect, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. Next slide, please. So next week, we're going to be hosting virtual office hours. So you all can stop by if you have any questions regarding the Advocacy Day. The English language office hours will be next Wednesday from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. And the Spanish language office hour will also be next Wednesday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Next slide, please. All right, so our schedule on May 4th, as a reminder, this is virtual, so everyone should have a calendar invite with a Zoom link already. If you don't, please email me or Angelica and we will sort that out. So the Advocacy Day goes from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. From 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., we're all going to be together in the main Zoom. We'll have a welcome and an orientation. At 11 a.m., we're going to divide up into different groups. And each group will have its own meeting schedule and its own Zoom link for the meetings with legislators from 11 a.m. to 1:45 p.m. We are going to be sending information about your groups closer to the advocacy day. And some of you may be receiving emails soon, seeing if you'd be comfortable taking on a certain role in the meeting, like being a group leader, answering tough questions, being a note taker. So that's what's really going to be the heart of the advocacy day. The meetings with legislators will happen from 11 a.m. to 1:45. And we're going to build in some time too, so that you have some time to get to know everyone in your group, make a plan before you have your first meeting with a legislative office. And as I said earlier, we're going to organize the groups by geography so that everyone, even if they're not a constituent of every office that they're meeting with, they're close by, they live or work close by. And we'll be requesting meetings with both state senators and state assembly members. And then at 1:45, we'll come back to the main Zoom that we were in the morning for a quick group debrief to hear how the meetings went and a closing exercise. Next slide. So I do just want to give a quick reminder that we will be having interpretation on the advocacy day so that both English and Spanish speakers can participate. And the morning and closing will both be bilingual. And so everyone will need to select a channel in Zoom for either English or Spanish, and that will allow the interpreters to interpret when both English and Spanish speakers are speaking. And just a quick reminder about best practices for bilingual spaces. Try to remember to speak slowly, pause after you finish speaking, speak clearly. And if anyone indicates that there's an issue with interpretation, we'll stop until we resolve the issue. Next slide. All right, so we have arrived at questions. Does anyone have any questions about anything that we've discussed in the training so far?
Katie, do you know what type of support we're getting from the state Senate and the Assembly? Do we have a good deal of them supporting the bills?
That is a great question. So where the bills are right now is they've all the Assembly bills have passed their first committee, which means that some Assembly members have already voted for them. The paid sick days bill is going to be heard in the Senate Labor Committee tomorrow. So I would say that so far we've had good support, but also a lot of legislators may not have seen these bills yet because they haven't been referred to their committees. So we want to make sure that we meet with as many folks as we can on the advocacy day to make sure that they understand how many folks are in support. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Does anyone else have questions? Feel free to enter them in the chat or just unmute yourself. I don't know if anyone has their hand up. All right, I'm not hearing or seeing any other questions. So I think we can move to the next slide. We may wrap up a little early. So before we end the training, we want to invite everyone to enter into the chat one thing that you are excited to tell legislators on May 4th.
I'm excited to tell legislators about the exceeding bill for sick time hours to move ahead to a longer time. I'm originally one of the original workers with Jenna Cassidy to work on the original first one, 3 days, 32 hours. So to see this progress, I'm excited.
That's awesome. Thank you for your advocacy on the original bill and on this bill. That's really awesome to hear. Yeah, and seeing in the chat that legislators are in a position to truly help California workers and families, the importance of paid sick leave for all workers, how much we need more robust paid sick days and how they can help caregivers and workers thrive. That California should join other jurisdictions in preventing caregiver discrimination. Anyone else, feel free to unmute yourself or post in the chat. And these new bills can help assist in job retention for California employees after a very tough pandemic. Yeah.
Katie, is it at all helpful or beneficial once we have this May 4th meeting that workers like myself and other workers can email or call our legislators to push that bill to move it forward as much as possible? Is it something that I want to consider doing?
Absolutely. I think it's so important for legislators to hear from you and from other people who do not have any more than the 3 paid sick days. It's very, very important. I will say that for that bill in particular, there are some groups that represent large employers who are in opposition. And so I think for that one, it's particularly important that they hear from workers, and that would be amazing. I'm seeing a couple of final thoughts in the chat that we should join West Hollywood's 12 paid sick days, recognizing the many ways that people identify who is their family. All right. I think if you don't mind going to the next slide, Natasha, that would be great. So thank you all so much for your time, for your important advocacy. We're just so excited to make sure that you all have an opportunity to meet with your legislators to share why these issues are important to you. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Angelica or anyone at the California Work and Family Coalition if you have questions or ideas about the Advocacy Day or what else we can be doing to uplift the importance of this bill, these bills. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks, guys.